Hello and welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast. My name is Ralph Cree. This is brought to you in association with bodyheartmindspirit.co.uk. In this episode I talk to my friend Yeshe, who's had a very interesting life and has a very interesting life now, and I imagine will continue to have a very interesting life. The two main themes we talked about today were her time visiting India, which she did for over a period of several years, and also her life living off-grid, which she's done most of her adult life. These are two things that quite a lot of people are interested in, going to India, experiencing Indian spirituality, and so because she's done it for quite a long time, had lots of interesting experiences, met different teachers, Tibetan gurus and Indian gurus, done lots of different spiritual practices and stuff out there. She's got some very interesting things to say about it, and how you might achieve that kind of trip if you want to do that by coming, earning money at home, traveling, coming back, earning money, traveling. And she had this kind of off-grid lifestyle at home, which is very, very simple, living in yurts, benders, which are a handmade tent that you make out of tree saplings and tarpaulins. And then for the last 12 years she's lived in a roundhouse which she built with her partner, living completely off-grid in Wales. And we talk about her experience living off-grid, how you might do it, what are the great things about living off-grid, what are some of the challenges, and then at the end of the conversation we wrap it up with a little exploration of psychedelics, because that's something that Yeshe and myself have been enthusiasts of for our lives. And she in particular had this interesting experience where she went out and was John Lilly's carer for a bit of time in Hawaii. And for those of you who are enthusiasts of psychedelics, I'm sure you will have heard of John Lilly. He was someone who invented the sensory deprivation flotation tanks. So I thought this was a very interesting conversation, and I hope you enjoy it too. So Yeshe, welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast.
Hey, hi, well, nice to be here, Ralph. Yeah. Hi.
So we've known each other for, I think, 11 years. Well, basically as long as I've been together with my wife, as you are childhood friends. And you've had a very interesting life, and you currently live a very interesting life. And so two specific areas that I thought we could explore today, because so one of them is you went to India for a long time and really went for that. So a lot of people, they think, oh, I'd like to go to India to explore Eastern spirituality, yoga, those sort of things, but it's quite common for people to just dip their toe in. But you dip your whole body in, right? You're over your head into it.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing is you, for a long time, have had an off-grid life, and that's another thing. I mean, a lot of people who are interested in living off-grid, and again, a lot of people dip their toes in it, go on the old kind of glamping holiday or those sort of things, but you have lived this full time for a long time. So it's the kind of, you've got a depth of experience with these two things that I thought would be really interesting to explore, and possibly very helpful for other people who were thinking about doing either of these things, to hear your story. So how's that sound?
Yeah, great. Yeah, let's go.
Cool. Okay, let's go. I like it. So if we start with your time in India, the first thing I'm interested to know is what made you decide to go to India in the first place?
India.
And when was this?
Gosh, I think I first went when I was 23, and it was a kind of synchronistic happening. I didn't actually want to go anywhere when I was younger. I had dogs. I was quite happy living at home. But I used to care for a young child with a degenerative disease, and I would take her down to a hospice once a month, once every 6 weeks. And the driver, the escort that would take us down there, he was always encouraging me. He was going, "Oh, before you have kids or start a family, you should travel, you should get out there, you should see the world." And he had friends in Manali, which is northern India. And so there came a point where I was going to go to Calgary with a friend to visit Canada. And then he ran off to a road protest site. And so I was all geared up to go. I got some money from the redundancy money when I left working in the school after the little girl passed away. And so I was ready to go. I had my passport, I had some money. And then suddenly a big space appeared. And I'd always been really inspired by the shamanic traditions of South America and the Eastern traditions of India and Nepal. And so it was, which way? But that had like a safety net to go and visit this guy's friends and go and stay with them. So that was what initially made me choose India, was just having a safety net that I could go there and there would be somebody. So I went to India, and I ended up only visiting these friends of my associate back here. And it was all a bit weird. But by the time I got there and by the time I landed, and when you travel and there are no restrictions on anything, you've got no routines to hold you, you've got nothing to hold you into anything. So the opportunity for synchronicities and flow is just beautiful. And so it started immediately. And I landed, I met a friend to travel with. And so I did go up to northern India. I visited my friends briefly, but then I kind of spent the first 2 months of that trip just kind of floating around, not really knowing where to go, what to do. I kind of went up north, down south, over to the east, over to the west. I have to say I've never actually been to Goa, and I've never made it to Agra. So the whole sort of like 12 years that I was going, I mean, I kind of traveled all over the place. And it wasn't until I ended up in an ashram down in South India, down near Kerala, that I sort of landed. And I started to meet people that I really felt a beautiful connection with. And then I found out about some teachings that were happening up in northern India with the Dalai Lama. And suddenly I started to be pulled. So then I went up to northern India and I ended my trip. I think the first time I only went for 3 months, but I ended my trip with some 10 days of teachings with the Dalai Lama, and then 20 days of Vipassana retreat in the Thai temple with an English Dharma teacher that had trained and spent time in the forest tradition, the Thai forest tradition, with Ajahn Chah. And that just grounded me. It was like, I've landed. I found what I'm looking for. And then I ran out of money. I had to come home, but I was hooked. It was like, okay, this is what I want to be doing. This is what I've been looking for. So it's just like the last month of my 3-month trip that, yeah.
I have been to Manali, where you first went. It's absolutely beautiful place. And seen the Dalai Lama teaching at McLeod Ganj, Dharamsala, and and I mean, I like you, I got the bug of India. I just fell in love with it. I've been 3 times, not anywhere near as long as you, and I think it's an amazing place. So I've also done one of these Vipassana retreats too. I only did a 10-day one, and I have to confess, for me, most of it was dealing with pain, the pain of sitting. I mean, at that time, I'd meditated for an hour a day for years. At that time, so I could sit really comfortably for an hour, no problem. Yeah. But I never really pushed it beyond that. And then suddenly going for 10 hours a day, 10 days.
I said that was a Goenka retreat.
It was a Goenka one, yeah. So a little bit different.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the ones They had walking and sitting and walking and sitting and standing, and you were allowed to do yoga. You were allowed to do your washing. It was a bit more autonomous and a bit more kind of like giving you the space to follow what you needed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that is what I would have preferred to have gone on.
Me too. Me too. I
So
had to say I did a Goenka retreat many years later, and it was, for me, it didn't work. I just really, yeah, I rebelled. Yeah, I just didn't get on with the Goenka one. I loved his teachings. The teachings were phenomenal. The videos in the evenings that he had recorded were absolutely exquisite, but the actual setting, the holding, yeah, it really didn't. And once I had to do a kind of a CV of what Vipassana I'd done, and I realized I actually left that one out. I'd completely forgotten, like I deleted it from my memory that I'd even done that one. So yeah, I think
yeah, I think that you need to get up and be able to do yoga and walking and
yeah.
exercise in between all of the sitting, because yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So so then you've come home, and what happens next?
Well, I was already living off grid at the time. I was sort of like very simple living. I was where was I living at that point? I think I was living at the end of a friend's garden in Somerset, in Frome, and I would come back, rebuild my bender, and then I was doing living care work by this point. I started because it was a bit more flexible. So I came back, I
You might have
worked
to describe what a bender is for people
a
listening.
bender. A bender is a very, very simple dwelling that's very easy to build and very cheap. So when you're a young, skint hippie with very little resources and you want to keep all your resources possible to go to India, it's basically where you cut hazel poles and I would make a floor out of pallets and then carpet the floor, bend the poles over the shape that I'd created. I'd usually do an L-shaped one so I could have my bed in a little kind of pod, and then cover it with blankets and throws, make it very beautiful. Get a wood burner in there, little gas cooker, and cover it with a great big marquee canvas at the time when you could buy those for very little. And so I would be living in that whilst going away and working. I'd to and fro. So I'd kind of work for a couple of weeks, have a couple of weeks off. But as I got more into going back to India and wanting to really keep my time, like as much time as I could, I would just binge work. So I would come back and I would do kind of like 2 months solid or 3 months solid and just really, save every penny I earned so I could just go back and carry on with what I was doing. And it was almost like, it was really strange that it was like the time in India was my real life. And I would go back home, I would work, I would socialize a little bit, catch up with friends. But then whenever I went back to India, it was almost like when you're in a book and you pick the book back up and you're back in that book again. It was kind of like, yeah, it was very strange. It was almost like there was my really real life that was there. And then there was my sort of samsaric mundane one that I had to come back and do. So yeah, so I would live very simply. And I was, like I said, I have to say, I've never entered the rat race properly. I've never owned a television. I've never owned a fridge. I've never, I paid rent. I did rent a flat for 1 or 2 months when I was younger, but I found it so consuming, like what I had to do to pay for this box that I didn't really want to be in anyway was just so crazy to me. I simply couldn't do it. All I ever wanted was just the corner of a field, somewhere green, somewhere natural, somewhere close to the earth that I could just live very simply, and live my life from there. So I was already kind of doing the off-grid thing simply because I didn't like being in a box. I didn't enjoy, and the craziness of having to pay so much money for the displeasure. Yeah. So a bit like that.
And then so then you're living in your bender, working, and then sort of when's the next trip back to India?
Yeah, basically as soon as I had kind of enough money to keep me going for as long as possible. And I would sort of come back for the summer. I would come back late spring, work through till early autumn, and then go back again. And it was kind of strange. I remember at the time that I perceived everything, all financial transaction was how long could I live in India on this for? Everything I did, like, yeah, it was just funny. Everything translated into how long I could be in India on this for. And so it was just Whereas some people would want to buy nice shoes, or they'd be saving up for a car, or they'd be putting a down payment on a house. For me, it was just how long, how long would this keep me in India? I think I used to, and again in India, I would live quite simply and quite frugally, and often in simple guest houses and monasteries and retreat places. So, it was just get me back out there. And it was it was a need. It wasn't just oh, I just want to go back and bum around in India. It was just like such a strong calling that, yeah, I couldn't not do it. And coming back, I would sometimes really struggle coming back. It would be, I'd arrive back into Heathrow, and it would just be like a cloud would descend, just the heaviness of the UK, the grey faces of the people I would see. I found it, I would get, yeah, I would go out to India, and it would be like going home. And I would come back to the UK, and it would just be like, oh, God, really? Yeah. So quite, yeah.
And what were you? Well, actually, one thing I remember about coming back from India to England was how green England is. Just looking
Mm.
around you, all the green trees.
Yes, yes,
It was,
that's true. Actually, yeah, because India is very orange and yellow,
mm,
and
yeah,
it's very, and unfortunately, since plastics arrived, very messy.
yeah,
A lot of litter. So I must admit, I did get a deep appreciation for the tidiness of this country, and the greenness. The green is always, that was the one thing that would, and again, that's probably why I needed to live off grid, because the greyness of built up areas really didn't appeal. But if I could surround myself with nature and trees and yeah, the vitality of life, that would keep me going whilst I was here.
yeah.
Yeah, and I was basically in summer for 12 years.
That
I kind of,
was great.
yeah, yeah. I forget about that.
So when you were going back to India, I know that you got into yoga and meditation and um, Tibetan Buddhism and those kind of
Mm,
things.
mm, mm.
Could you sort of talk a bit how let's take yoga to
Mm,
start
mm,
with.
mm.
When did you get into that?
I started practicing yoga when I was about 19, and meditation as well. I'd been into more indigenous cultures before then. I remember reading all of the Carlos Castaneda books and a lot of shamanic work before then. But then when I was 19, I had a kind of awakening Kundalini thing. And I didn't know what the hell happened to me. I really didn't know what it was. So it was in the Eastern traditions that I began to find correlations to what I had experienced. And so I think a lot of my going to India was also trying to find somebody that could help me understand what happened and what it meant, and what was I meant to do with it, and how was I supposed to help it unfold. And it was also interesting that I was pulled to two lineages. Usually people are either into one thing or another. But for me, I was drawn to the path of yoga largely through the Sachinanda, the Shivananda tradition, and which is a very conservative, it's a very well held or tradition that's still alive, and the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, so which is much more shamanic. And it was almost like every step of my path, it would be one step on the yoga tradition, and then one step on the Tibetan tradition. And to the irony that I think when I think after 3 years, 4 years of going back, because it's 3 years, I was 26, when I finally got a clear answer as to what had happened to me. And it was from both traditions within a week. So I had been like 7 years, like, what was it? What happened? And then within no, it was within 1 month, I got the answer from the yoga tradition in a book from my guru that I just found and connected with. And then also from some Dalai Lama teachings, again in Bodh Gaya, that I was attending 10 days of teachings. And during those teachings, the Dalai Lama also described this process and this happening that happened. And so it was really strange the way both paths for me complemented each other very beautifully. Yeah. And supported my own growth and my own development. But there did come a point where I had to make a choice, because in the Tibetan tradition, my Tibetan guru didn't mind me when I came back to England to live in an ashram. I remember asking Holiness, do you mind is it okay for me to live in an ashram? Because many people in our Sangha would be like, oh, you can't do this, you can't mix things, you can't. And he just kind of looked at me and he said, oh, yeah, for you, no problem, it's okay. But then, so I also met my two main teachers and gurus within the same year, and one led me to the other. One of them was Swami Niranjananand from the Satyananda tradition in Mungir in Bihar. And meeting him was, I just spent 3 months doing a Ngondro practice, which is preliminary practices for highest yoga tantra. All monks and nuns have to do these 100,000 prostrations, 100,000 mandalas, 100,000 Vajrasattva, and 100,000 Guru Rinpoche, Guru Yogas. And so I just completed the first 100,000, which was taking refuge in Guru. So I'd spent like 7-8 hours a day, every day, prostrating myself to this image of Guru. And as I'm doing it, being a Westerner, I'm kind of like, what am I doing? Who is this? What is this? You know, and what it turned out to be for me, because it's all about, the way I see it is, it's all about relationship. We have to take something that's essentially formless and bring it into forms that we can make relationship with, so there can be a kind of an understanding, because ultimately it's all non-dual, but the existence that we have is a very relative dualistic experience. So it's giving us tools to work within this kind of like polarity that we find ourselves. And so after literally I'd wanted to go to this ashram in India for 2 years. 2 years I'd been trying to go and visit this ashram, and no success, not allowed in, no, we don't have any space. And so I'm doing these prostrations and I'm getting really close to the end. I think I had like 6,000 prostrations left to do. And I meet this German guy, and I was doing 2,000 a day.
Only 6,000.
Only 6,000. But yeah,
you're doing
I was
2,000
doing
a day.
2,000 a day. Yeah,
Okay.
and man, my body was hurting. But yeah, it was quite profound. You know, people like altered states, and you can, yeah, there are all different ways you can go about this.
And these are prostrations, completely lying face flat on the ground with
Yes.
your arms outstretched and everything, and then going back to a standing position.
Yes, and you'd hire a prostration board. There would be probably 100-200 monks and nuns all doing the same practice in the same area. And I used to do these practices in Bodh Gaya, in the temple complex around the Bodhi tree and the temple. And it was basically like being inside a battery. And you'd have, for 3 months of the winter, you'd have monks and nuns all coming from all over northern India to do their practice, to do their Ngondro practice. But there would just be like hundreds of us just up and down and up and down. And whilst people are circumambulating the inside, circumambulating around us, another Kora circuit around the outside of that. So it was just like being in this big prayer mandala of everyone doing it was so epic. It was such a profound time of my life. When I look back on it, there's not much I can compare it to. So I was doing this practice. I had about 6,000 left, and I was having chai one evening after sort of finishing for the day, chatting to a German guy, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm just on my way to this Mungir ashram. They have this big like prayer yagya happening for the next 2 weeks. And I was like, what's this? You know, and he told me it was an open thing and anyone can go, and they're having like a whole 10-day yagya, which was like a big prayer mantra celebration thing. And I was like, can I come? Can I come with you? And he's like, yeah, I leave in 2 days. So I was like, okay, I've got 2 days to finish 6,000 prostrations. So like 10 hours for the next 2 days. I was like up really early, all day prostrations, all day the next day prostrations. And then 5 o'clock the next morning, I'm on a bus with this guy heading to Mungir. And then the following day we arrive, and I walk into the ashram where everyone's registering. And this being, this swami, just a swami, you know, he doesn't look particularly much. He's possibly taller and very straight bodied, very aligned. This guy just come around to the corner and goes into an office. And literally it was like a golden breeze just knocked me up out of my body. And when I fell back down into myself again, I was like, that's him. And it was like meeting the being that I just spent the last 3 months kind of praying to. you know. So it was like, I mean, again, it's almost like manifestation. You focus on something enough and you bring it into life.
Mm.
And so then I had the next 10 days of the most mind-blowing. I have to say, I felt like I was tripping for 10 days. It was quite profound. The whole ceremony was just like nothing I'd. And I think from all that practice and from all that devotion and generating all this devotion, and I was just in such a ripe space to be in that position, and be in. And that was meeting my first guru. And for the next 2 months, he was just in me and with me. It was almost like he was just walking alongside me. He wasn't obviously in an actual way, but it felt like he was just right there with me. Any question I had, there was the answer. And yeah, and it was quite powerful. And even when I met him, you know, like nobody could get near to this guy. He always had a crowd of people, a crowd of swamis. It was impossible to get around to meet him. And yet every time I needed to like ask him something, or I mean, it was only twice, 2 or 3 times, he would just be there. And there would be no one around him. And I would just be able to walk up to him and go, oh, hi, Swamiji, blah, 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 blah. You know, it was really quite magical. Yeah, yeah. And it was through him that I then met my second teacher as well. I say through him internally guiding me. Because when I met my Tibetan teacher, I remember him just kind of in my head saying, well, you've dedicated to the Tibetan path, so you need a good teacher here. And it was literally on that grounds that I accepted His Holiness Gyalwang Drukpa as my second teacher. So yeah, but I then carried on with this sort of like dualistic pattern of having two gurus, and for holiness it was no problem. But then when I went back to the ashram, like the second year or third year later, people going, oh, you can't do this and that. And so I went up to Swami Naranjan and I kind of said, oh, look, you know, I kind of like have two gurus. I've got you and my Tibetan guru. You know, is this okay? And he sort of says, well, you know, this kind of like spiritual polygamy, you know, you should really just choose one. And so, yeah.
Well,
So then,
it's an interesting point, and there's been quite a theme of my podcast is not having to choose one thing, and that, and I think that so there's this saying, well, there's a traditional Japanese saying of chase two rabbits, catch none, but that's just one way of looking at it. And there's the other way of thing people say of digging lots of shallow holes,
yes,
no deep ones.
yeah,
But again, that's just one way of looking at it. I think you can dig several pretty deep holes,
yes, yes,
and
absolutely.
having some shallow ones is not bad either.
Yeah.
Holes of different depths, and I think people specialize. You're always naturally going to specialize in one or two things because you're born with these innate talents in certain areas. Everyone is, and you're naturally going to go deep in those areas. But you know, the kind of caricature. So I've said the caricature of the cafeteria model of spirituality, or the spiritual polygamy, as your guru called it.
Yes.
But we could caricature the other side of that, which is only following one path, one method, and that's kind of ultra conservatism and an inability, lack of flexibility, a kind of brittleness. Because if that one thing doesn't work, you all your eggs are in one basket, and life can throw all sorts of different things at you, and so I think it's easy to bring out the pros and cons of either both of these approaches, and I really think, particularly living in the time we live in, we've got all of these spiritual traditions out there completely exposed in front of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do think we're in a sort of we got this unique opportunity to compose a new type of spirituality,
mm,
which so
mm,
Tibet doesn't have a strong tradition of the use of psychedelic
mm,
medicines,
mm.
because of the geography of Tibet
Yes, yes.
doesn't really. Um,
Well,
I
there's
think there are
questions about
a
that.
few
Yeah,
things that,
yeah, there are hidden things.
yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
I know cannabis grows a lot through a lot of
Mm, mm,
sort of that kind
mm.
of area of the world.
But there's a rainforest area up in there called Pemako as well, and I think that holds a whole different area of potential medicines. But
Right.
again, it's very, I would say it would be very secret teachings that very few disciples would be given or need, because
Yeah.
essentially the practices they have developed are pretty powerful in themselves. But I get the feeling that there was, in the older days, in the Tantrika days, I think there was a lot more secret use for the right people where it was necessary
Yeah.
and useful. Yeah,
And there
but
were
also going
there were trade routes as well
exactly,
that
and
bring
there was
these
a
things around.
huge,
Yeah.
yes, huge amount of
I think
relationship between
what I mean
India.
is
Mm,
it's not front and center in
no,
Tibetan
no,
Buddhism, whereas in sort of
no.
South American shamanic traditions,
Yeah,
it very much is front and
that's
center.
the
It's
medicine.
ayahuasca and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
peyote mushrooms, those
Mm.
kind of things. So
Yeah.
my personal view is that Tibetan Buddhism has got a lot to learn from the Amazonian
Mm, mm,
shamans, for example, and vice
mm.
versa.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that's just a little kind of footnote
Mm.
on that. So
Yeah.
I,
And I
because
think also
yeah,
to add to that, just like the metaphor you used of digging several holes, for me, it felt very much like that awakening dug the hole, and I dug the hole, and it went all the way down. And then I needed help to know, like, okay, so what now? I've kind of dug my hole and I've kind of found something. It wasn't complete, it wasn't the whole picture. But both spiritual paths and both teachers had something to share with me, and it wasn't verbally, because my yoga Swami Naranjan, he was very much an embodiment of what I knew to be true. But the teachings he was giving were very relative teachings and very yoga kind of graduated path teachings. But what I perceived and what I experienced as a direct transmission from his being was a complete transmission of the non-dual state. And I realized, like, through the heart connection we have with these beings, when we have like this open heart channel connection with a being of such awakened magnitude, it's literally like when you plug into a computer, the information can just get transmitted from one hard drive to the other. And that, for me, is what takes place between a guru and a disciple, is this direct transmission of Gnostic kind of knowing and beingness and purification and awakening. And what Swami Naranjan did for me was essentially, they talk in guru disciple relationships of bestowing blessings. And those blessings are transmissions of wisdom and awakening and understanding. And I remember, so when I was 19, I say I had this awakening, but it wasn't complete. It didn't answer the questions that I'd been seeking. It kind of it gave me a grander understanding and a bigger perception of the whole of the polarity of existence. But I was essentially looking for God and for love, God in the form of love. I was looking for, like Buddha, suffering. How do we end the suffering? Why is there this suffering? And all of that sort of like really primal stuff. And my Tibetan teacher was teaching the non-dual. He was teaching the Mahamudra and the Dzogchen. And he was also an embodiment of it, but in a different way. Whereas my Swami teacher was teaching the graduated path of yoga. So it was kind of like both being had something to transmit to me. And when I was 26, because also, I mean, talking about the psychedelics, I first met medicine plants when I was 14. And then they gave me a bit of a telling off, because I was a bit of a child with it. And I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. It was I would always feel sort of like, I was always questing. I was always looking for God and looking for spirit and looking for wisdom. So it was never, I wasn't just like necking magic mushrooms because it was fun. I took them and I touched God, and it was powerful, but it was also very fun, and it also made me laugh. And so they kind of gave me a bit of a telling off after a few occasions, and I stepped back for a few years. But then again, the psychedelic path was a huge part of my healing before I started traveling. And when I started traveling, it was like, okay, I need to integrate what I've been shown, and I need something very down to earth and practical. So my time in India was a very much like, you know, do the work, sit, practice, meditate, you know, receive blessings, receive initiation, purify the crap that's shadowing my heart and stopping me from being able to live from that full space of love that I've touched. But when I come back, it's still clouded, it's shrouded in this kind of like cloud of what would they call it, afflictive emotions, you know. So both of my teachers gave me very different tools for slowly understanding and working through that. And Swami Naranjan was the being who gave me the blessings for the second awakening that I had when I was 26. And that did answer my questions, and that did open the door to my heart and showed me everything. And that was what he was for. That was what his blessing and gift and karmic thing for me was. Whereas my Tibetan teacher was longer, it was ongoing, there was more. He was more of a practical teacher, because after Swami Naranjan had said to me, you need to choose one teacher, I was like, well, of course it's you. So I immediately left the ashram, jumped on a bus, jumped on a train, jumped on another bus. I think 2 days later arrived in Kathmandu, you know, hitchhiking my way up to my to Holiness's nunnery. And literally, as I'm sitting on this, like sitting on this tractor, slowly chugging up the hill to the nunnery, and Holiness drives past me coming the other way. And just in that moment of seeing him, it was like I was going up to say, look, Holiness, thank you for everything you've done for me, you know, but I've got to choose one teacher, so I'm going to be heading back to the ashram. In that moment of seeing him, it was like, no, it's you. It was kind of like falling in love. It was like, okay, wow. And so in that moment, I knew that he was the teacher that I was going to be staying with. And so from, you know, the next 10 years, I then spent going deeper and deeper into the Tibetan Buddhist path. Yeah.
I think it was you were lucky to encounter the gradual path and the sudden path at the same time, because this is another one of those things that my personal opinion is that most people should expose themselves to direct, sudden teachings like Dzogchen,
Yeah.
Mahamudra, Rinzai Zen, those kind of things.
Advaita,
Yeah, and also the gradual path, like the Soto Zen, or some of the well, there's tons of them, but
yeah.
I'm not going to list them all, but because those two in this kind of binary way scaffold each other to always be moving forwards.
Yeah.
And you know, the sort of critique of people that just do the sudden stuff is that they get a flash of insight and then they're like, oh, that will do, and then you spend their time sitting around drinking tea and playing video games and reading trashy magazines or something, and then and thinking that that's it, or everything's done. Which that's a kind of they're right, but they're also they kind of created a perverted version of that. And then on the other side, you've got people that are always just on the gradual path, and they're kind of grinding after an ever receding horizon that they never reach.
Well, they'll never purify all that karma that they've apparently got, and all the afflictive emotions that we get. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think you get this psychedelics as well, isn't it? You get the psychedelic, you get the insight, and you get the profound, like, wow, okay. But without the integration, without the tools to really integrate it. And even now, there's no guidebook. really. I mean, we're in a paradigm where it's all up in the air right now. Even what is, karma, reincarnation. And even for myself as a youngster, I used to be like, oh yeah, karma, I get that, and reincarnation, oh yeah. But now the more I learn, the less sure about anything I become. And the only thing I get left with is that um, I need to choose. I need to choose what I want my life in this, what my life to be about. Do I choose love, or do I choose like just indulgence? Do I choose service, or do I choose hedonism? And in each moment, maybe sometimes I choose hedonism because I'm human. We all like to have fun. But it's kind of like in each moment we have choices. And then, I mean, and then in, but the irony and the paradox of that is that in the non-dual, in the Advaita, in the Dzogchen, there's no choice. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to achieve. There's nothing to gain. So, it's just suffused in paradox. And we live in this kind of like apparently binary world that's also a whole. And it's like for the last 7 years since coming home and settling and becoming a mother, I've been living on one piece of land in Wales, and I've really got into the cyclical. And I found it really ironic that I spent 12 years largely in Buddhism, which is to end cyclical existence, to free ourselves from cyclical existence. And the last 5 years, I've been teaching and sharing and doing workshops on how to live within the cyclical, and how to honor the cyclical nature of existence, and how to ride it without getting bashed about, because we do relatively live in a cyclical world that cycles from birth to death, from birth to death. And in our own lifetime, we have several like cycles of being reborn as a new person, and then that dies, and we shed that, and we get reborn again, and it's the paradox for me. And also, like, okay, I've had like 2-3 awakenings, and yet still as a parent, I'm just stuck sometimes as to like, wow, what do I do right now with sugar and technology and boundaries and all this relative stuff, that it's like, well, ultimately it's all fine, and I could just go, oh, it's all fine, I don't need to do anything, I can just let my children be free. But we all know where that goes. It's life is kind of a never-ending journey of learning.
Yeah.
And yeah, and integration and experimentation. So yeah, a bit of a deviation there,
No,
but
it's good. So you've segued us kind of naturally into your move back into, having been a nomad, going around into this kind of living in one place
yes.
in Wales,
Mm,
um, and living completely off grid. And
mm.
I visited you recently, and it really is in the middle of nowhere. And
Yeah.
the track to get to your house,
It's
uh,
quite shocking, isn't it?
yeah, I think when seeing you nip up and down it in your car, so what it's just second nature to you, and you know all the
Mm,
little bits to go. But for me, it
mm,
was like driving down a dried riverbed or something.
mm, mm.
Um,
Yes.
very steep, bare rock, and yeah, it was, and it's in a very very remote location,
Mm,
and you can't hear cars,
mm.
roads, trains. It's a
Yeah.
very feels it really does feel like just away from civilization,
Mm,
in
mm.
the kind of hills.
Yes.
So you've come. That's where you've been living
Mm,
completely off grid, and
mm.
your house looks like something out of the Shire in Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Um, Perhaps we
Yeah.
could start there with um, the building you actually live in, because
Mm,
that's
mm,
what the first thing people think of when they're,
mm,
because I meet a lot of people who are wanting to live off grid.
mm, mm,
Um, I've met a lot of people who've sold all their stuff up. They've moved
mm,
into a van. They're traveling around looking for
mm,
the place where they can live,
mm.
and that's finding somewhere to live is probably not going to be part of this conversation because that's a whole nother
Mm.
thing. And
Yes.
people can look on the internet
Yeah.
about where do you find the place. Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are looking for it. So
Mm.
let's say you found your place,
Mm.
wherever that is, maybe in Portugal. A lot of people end up in Portugal, those kind of places.
Yeah.
But Wales is sometimes a possibility.
Mm.
Then the next thing is what are you going to live in?
Yeah. Yeah.
So perhaps you could describe that process for you.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because although it's a different place, I see my whole off-grid life as a slow, gradual progression again. I started in Benders and then I built myself a yurt, and I ended up going from like living in a little tiny bender in a quarry completely illegally to living in a friend's garden to living on a beautiful ancient woodland in an organic farm. And slowly it just kind of opened up. And I think there's got to be again, this is about decision and choice. There's got to be a real clear choice that this is how I'm living, and there's no two ways about it for me. And a lot of people, they want to buy a piece of land, build a roundhouse, and they want it all to be perfect straight away. And I don't think in this country, where logistically that's really difficult, legally and logistically it's very difficult, it's like you're more likely to just buy a small bit of land and build a bender or get a caravan on there and just be on there. It's so it's just challenging. So for me, it was a part of my gradual progression, and I'd gone from bender to nice bender, and then a little roundhousey thing in my friend's land, to a yurt that I built in a woodland, and then to a roundhouse in this piece of land in Wales. Now, I've never owned a piece of land. I've never owned any of the land I've lived on, and I feel kind of at peace with that. I almost feel it's more true. I don't really believe we can own land, but we can be guardians of it. And I mean, again, it happened by synchronicity. It happened by happenstance. I just was very fortunate that things went the way they did. And, we could have all sorts of philosophical conversations about how that's so and how that happens. But it was just what I called into my life. It was how I wanted to live. And there was no two ways about it. And I'd always said, this area where I live, there's quite a few people there and quite a few children. And it was the only place that I would see children playing freely in the same way that I did when I grew up. And I always said, if I end up a single mother, I'm going to go and live there. And I didn't end up a single mother. I ended up meeting somebody that was already living there. And that was kind of how I ended up just going straight onto a beautiful piece of land and building a roundhouse without any obstacles or problems, just through the fortune and luck of it, really. So, and I must admit, I do feel all those years of practice, all those years in India, as I'm getting older, I'm realizing just how much shifted, how much I think I shifted inside me, how many like ancient, I mean, I don't want to go into that because it's a very old-fashioned way of thinking about things, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's rubbish, that's just bullshit. But in my own experience, when I started traveling, I had a lot of darkness inside of me. I was quite unhappy in many ways. And over the years, the purifications, the healings, the transformations that took place cleared stuff in me and made the life that I lead now possible, including landing where I did, including meeting the person that I had children with, including all of it. And at 5 months pregnant, I moved up to Wales, and we had 3 months to build the roundhouse. So there was already a structure there that had been deserted for 10 years. And we kind of rebuilt that. And we had the due date as the moving in date. So we spent 3 months rebuilding it. It cost us maybe $4,000 in materials to do it. And we moved in the day before my due date. And then the first morning that we woke up, I woke up at 3:30 in the morning in labor. And so I know exactly how long we've been living there because it's my daughter's birthday.
Wow.
So yeah. So the first whole day in the roundhouse was spent in labor. Yeah.
So we've been there 10 years, is that?
12 years now. 12
12.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because I seem to have this 12-year cycle thing. So I had 12 years in India, And then I've come and I've had 12 years off grid being there, and I'm still going to continue being there, but I can feel shifts again, you know, as my kids are getting older and as life's starting to open out again. Yeah, I can feel another 12-year cycle starting, but it will still probably be off grid.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what do you have as a power source in your house?
So we've got solar panels basically, and we've got, I mean, we've got a workshop, and we've got sort of three little spaces that all have solar panels on the roof and all have their own little electrical setup. We don't have internet. I've only got a rubbish phone signal in the house, so I have to go up into the workshop for internet. We don't actually have running water. I know many other people that live near us, they have piped water from the streams, and we could have, but we've got a little stream that runs through the piece of land we live on. And I think having that just literally 10 yards from the door takes the edge off needing to have running water. So we've got a filter for drinking water. We get our water from a borehole, but there are quite a few springs also dotted around. But the solar, you know, solar, a lot of people in houses have solar on their houses. And there's this kind of idea that, you know, oh yeah, it's fine, we can do everything we could do before. But living purely off grid and having solar, it will run the lights, it will charge a phone, and I can only charge a laptop if the sun's shining, because it draws so much out all at once that if we're in the middle of the winter, it would screw the batteries. And in the winter, often, you know, the electricity runs out at about 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, and we have to send it down from the workshop. So, you know, it's very interesting for my kids to grow up, because it's not just a constant supply of electricity. There's not just a constant flow of electricity. It's like, oh, quick, turn the lights off. We're about to run out of battery, or unplug your DVD player. You know, it's kind of, and I'm not worried about that being like a lack mentality. For me, it's like, just gives us an idea that we live on a finite planet that has finite resources, and there's not just an unending stream of electricity and everything. You know, for me, it's really valuable lesson to realize that things do run out, you know, and that's something that our culture really doesn't have in its forebrain. And it would possibly be really helpful if it did. Yeah. So,
And you grow some food, and you got chickens and that sort of
mm, yeah. I mean, we've had a bit of a troubled time this time, because the polytunnel's been getting invaded. We've got a large polytunnel, a garden area, but we're kind of like in a crack going down into a valley. So the sun leaves the garden by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I've only just successfully grown squash up in the field where I'm building a little glorified vendor, because it gets more sunlight. But we would often get like 80% of our own garlic and onions for the year. We would have greens like kale and cabbage throughout the year. You know, obviously everything seasonal, runner beans for 3 months, broad beans for a month or two, tomatoes all through the summer, salad from kind of spring till autumn or into the winter if we're clever. So, but it also gives you a very good idea of if you were actually growing the food that you wanted to eat, we would have to work a lot harder. You know,
yeah.
the amount of food, I'd say we get maybe 20% of our vegetable supplement, really. We still go out. And this is the interesting thing about living off grid, is it's impossible to really do it without, whilst there's still the world out there, it's kind of very disjointed in a way, because there's not the need to spend all day gardening and growing and everything. We have to get our wood, we have to get our water, and that in itself takes, you know, that takes time. So it's definitely a slower pace of life. And obviously we grow a certain amount of the food that we eat, but it's kind of an interesting experience wanting to live a certain way, but it literally being impossible because of the culture and the world around us, in a way, and also enjoying that and not being able to give it up and let it go because it is there. So, you know, I think I was reading a First Nation story, and it was talking about the sacred hoop, And I really could feel how the sacred hoop of the First Nations people, it was the way they lived, but it was the way they lived in relation to the land and the wildness and the wilderness around them. And once that wilderness was taken away, once the land was taken away and they couldn't freely hunt and freely travel and do all the things they needed to do, that was part of the breaking of the sacred hoop, because they weren't able, the men's nation weren't able to go out and fulfill their purpose and hunt and bring back the food, because they most likely got killed or caught in skirmishes or distracted with alcohol sellers and drunk, or it really broke down. And so it's kind of like the sacred hoop of life is still broken, because we haven't got the wilderness around us to really live off grid truly. If we wanted to be self-sufficient, we would be able to do it maybe in a farming way, but it would take a lot more land and a lot more work, which I'd be up for. But it's it's been a long time since in this land we've been self-sufficient. And I think the systems that need to be in place for that to be so, they could come back pretty quickly, but we would probably have 1 or 2 very hungry winters before that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think not a lot of people actually want to be farmers.
No. No.
That's the reality of growing your own food. It's pretty much all consuming activity. I mean, I've done a bit of it at my own home. I used to do more of it, kind of 15 years ago, and I just decided after doing a lot of it, I thought, I don't know. I mean, I like this. I like eating food and I like growing it and the understanding that comes with it. But I'd gone too far into becoming a cultured modern human, and I got a taste for it, and I didn't want to basically be a farmer. Not that there's anything wrong with being a farmer, but it's like only a certain proportion of people actually want to be farmers, and other people want to be musicians and
absolutely,
mechanics and all these other things.
Myself included. I don't think I want to be a farmer particularly. So it's
So what would you say? I mean, you've already talked about some of the challenges of living off grid, and this thing of the broken circle, the broken hoop, definitely is one of them. What about, what are some of the other big ones that you face in your life that other people don't have?
I think I am very blessed. I feel very blessed that myself and my family and other folks around, that we actually have this connection, have the land connection. We live very close to the earth. I have a direct experience of the communication that can take place between the land and the people. We have sweat lodge every full moon, every new moon. So we have the cyclical rhythms. And I think part of the sacred hoop as well is the fact that it's cyclical, it's round. And living on the land, I know when the moon's full and I know when the moon's new, just by going outside. And I think the effect on my physical body, I went to stay in London 4 or 5 years ago. And it was very foggy at that time. And so the sky was just orange. And we were staying in a bedroom that had quite thin curtains. So the room was orange. And I spent 3 days in orange at night. And I was aware that I didn't like it, but it wasn't until I got home and I stepped outdoors at night to go for a pee or something. And the darkness, it was like every cell in my body just went, oh God, thank you. So I think like just the very physical benefits of being aware of the rhythms of life, of having that darkness and that quietness. When I go and stay in a house, houses are so noisy. I always find it quite shocking, the kind of the fridges and the vibrations and the noises. So I think just on the biology, just living close to the land, the benefits of having that physical grounding. I go out in the garden barefoot. I go and I wash in the stream. You know, if I'm yeah, so the beauty of having all of that really helps keep me grounded, keeps me vital, keeps me healthy, very easily without actually having to do much. I don't go to the gym. I walk up and down the valley and go and visit a friend. You know, I go chop some wood, I saw some wood. So all of the things that people have kind of outsourced to a gym or to a, you know, it happens in life. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, it's interesting that you take what people do nowadays is they isolate certain parts of a natural human's life,
mm,
uh,
mm,
and then make them into a thing, like going to the gym
mm,
or
mm,
going to a
mm,
restaurant.
mm,
Um, yeah, that learning skills. The kind of you have to learn lots of skills when you
mm,
live off
mm,
grid because people aren't there to always help you. And
mm.
I mean, I imagine it's quite difficult to get to you at certain times of the year, for example.
Yes, yeah, we do. If it snows, we do get frozen in sometimes,
Yeah,
and you need snow socks or chains to get in and out. Which, yeah, it's okay because we do have that, but for other people, it can be shocking and a bit of a problem.
yeah,
But again, I mean, it is a lifestyle choice. It's not easy, and many people would not choose to do it. But I think a lot of people would be surprised at, like, a lot of people that don't do it are aware of the fears and are aware of the losses, like, oh, but I wouldn't have an easy phone signal, I wouldn't be able to stream Netflix, I wouldn't be able to have hot running water. But they're not aware of the beauty and the amazing other side of it. I had a friend once, she was very much into her town and city life. She loved it, she loved makeup, she loved high heels, she loved dressing up and going out, you know, and all. And yet she would come and visit me when I lived in Mabenda, and she just loved it. She loved it. And she was like, oh, I could so enjoy doing this actually if I, you know, and I think people don't realize how quickly they would actually slip back into to living simply, because
yeah,
it is our nature. It is what we've done for hundreds of thousands of years. Like, you know, not having a TV, but sitting around a fire with people and chatting and playing music, and all the things that we've done for millennia, we still do.
yeah,
And my most precious memories, my most joyful memories, like when I'm on my deathbed and my mind's flicking through all the beautiful moments in my life, most of them will be sat around an open fire and will involve music and singing and smiling faces and love shared with other people. And for me, fortunately, that happens quite often. You
yeah,
know, we celebrate the cross quarterly festivals and the equinoxes and the solstices. We have like a clock where every 6 weeks one of these celebrations happen, and we come together and we join around the fire and we stay up all night singing. And again, it's like this rhythm, this kind of connection with the cycles of life and the cycles of earth and the cycles of being in a physical body, um, and really attuning. So for me, I think the whole lifestyle really roots into that, and it grounds into that. So it doesn't matter where I go from that. You know, I can go and visit the city, I can go and watch, you know, I can do all of those things because I'm rooted and grounded in that cyclical, yeah, that spiral cyclical nature that keeps me kind of, yeah, keeps me connected to the land. Yeah, and the
yeah,
land connects back to me as well. It's a two-way thing. It's not just me. There is a reciprocity that happens as well.
yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, I think living within cycles that are natural versus living in the modern calendar world with
mm,
um, all the diaries and all the synchronized timing and
mm, mm,
it works. This was you could call it the machine world. The
mm, mm.
railways, cars, offices,
Yeah,
punching
yeah,
your time clock in at work, and
yeah,
all
yeah.
of that's a completely different type of rhythm to the
Mm,
types
mm,
of
mm.
rhythm you're describing.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think a lot of people that end up living off grids have found it very difficult being part of the machine world.
yeah,
And
yeah,
even
yeah.
living a modern
Mm,
house is actually a machine.
mm,
Is you're living in a machine with all the electric wiring and um,
mm,
dishwashers and clocks and everything, computers.
mm.
It's all just humming away.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and there is this kind of thing. But what are you doing for your battery?
Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Yeah, we're all right. We've probably got about another 20 minutes, half an hour or so, I reckon. Yeah.
Well,
The downside of being outside.
yeah,
Can't plug it into my tree here.
that's right.
Yeah.
So okay, so there's one other area where you and I share an interest in psychedelics.
Yeah.
And you, as far as I know, remember talking to you, you've actually, like a lot of the things in your life, you thought, you you really went for it and said, well, I want to well, you went for it with all of these different psychedelics and things, but also
Yeah.
there's this chap called John Lilly who a lot of
Yes.
people that are psychedelics enthusiasts would have heard of.
Mm.
And
Mm.
rather than just read some of his books like most people did, you said, I want to actually meet this guy. And you did. And you went and, as far as I can remember, you dropped some acid with him.
Yeah.
So-
Well, I dropped some acid in his tank.
oh, there you go. Yeah.
I ended up,
In
I
his
looked
tank.
after him for a month.
So
Yeah.
perhaps that is an interesting story to hear, because and perhaps, well, you could just say a little bit about who John Lilly is for those who don't know, because he's people that know who he is. He's quite a famous and important guy.
Yeah. So John, I mean, essentially, he invented the flotation tank. That's what a lot of people know him for. I think back when he was a young man and in university, there was the idea that if consciousness had no stimulus, the brain would just go to sleep. And so he was like, no, this is rubbish. This isn't true. So he created the flotation tank, the sensory deprivation tank, to show that the mind continued on. And he was doing work with dolphins. He wanted to create a translation system between dolphin and human, which never quite happened, unfortunately. But he ended up basically doing huge amounts of psychedelics, and he's possibly one of the only people that did possibly way too much ketamine without actually dying, because most of the other people that ended up going down that path, even in an experimental aware route with the intramuscular ketamine use, did all end up kind of, well, the main ones within that scene, a lot of them did die, and John nearly died twice, but he was luckily found and revived. So again, he had some good guides helping him in his world of synchronicity. He also he was one of the first ones to talk about synchronicities and coincidence. And he termed a whole like galactic, intergalactic, local coincidence control office. He kind of like had this whole thing. But again, when I was reading Carlos Castaneda, I was also reading a lot of John's work. And it's interesting to read his stuff because he started talking about AI long before AI was even a conception. He, on his ketamine trips, he was told about the solid state entity, which when I read his he's got an autobiography that he wrote back in the 80s, and I had read that, and I was like, wow, I want to go and meet this guy. And so I had an opportunity to go and work in Hawaii. I did one trip where I went around the world, and I chose Hawaii as one of the stop-off points in the hope that I could go and meet him. And then when the job that I had lined up fell through, I was about to cancel it. But again, my intuition was like, no, just have a look on John's website, see if there's something that you could go and help him with. And I found a phone number and phoned the number. And by the end of the phone call, I had arranged to go and live with him and look after him for a month, because he had had a stroke and he was bedridden, and they were struggling to like find care for him. So for that leg of my journey, I went and lived with him for a month and was his carer. And I would hang out with him for a day, and then I would have a day off. And he was a profoundly beautiful being. The energy around him was the same as I felt in the Ramana Maharishi ashram when I went there in India. It was just a deep sense of peace. And it was like when you're in the presence of a master or a guru, quite often questions just drop away. Any question that sort of comes to your mind or your tongue, it just instantly seems so trivial, because you're in the presence of something bigger. And he had a very, even though he still smoked cigarettes, I mean, the main thing he would say would be like, "Can you get me a cigarette?" And I'd just get him a cigarette and he'd smoke. And I just sit there with him, just in a sort of a state of extraordinary peace. But he had a flotation tank in his garage. So I did a couple of sessions straight. But I would usually, when I did go traveling, I would always just have a little bit of something stashed away in one of my bags somewhere in case the need arose for me to go deeper. I was like, "Hey, John, I'm going to do some acid in your tank tonight." And he was just like, "Great." And it was one of the profound experiences of my life that had a very lasting effect on me. And again, like you're saying, with plant medicine and with psychedelics, there are those experiences. For me, I used to get really annoyed, like people would just go, "Oh yeah, we're going to do some mushrooms," and it was just about like visuals or fun. For me, it was like, if there's no insight, if there's nothing learned, and there's nothing that I can integrate into my day-to-day life, then what's the point? And so for me, it was always like, I wouldn't just trip all the time. I would do a journey when I needed support, when I needed help. But on this occasion, it was like, I'm here, there's a flotation tank, and it feels like the right thing to do. And so, yeah, I've got a video on my YouTube channel about that particular journey, so I won't bore you with that. But it was a very beautiful and profound journey. And again, I think being in John's aura, being in his mandala, was a part of that as well. But I did have a crush on his manager, so I had to just basically spend about 2 hours of the trip just waiting for all of this nonsense that just kept bubbling through my mental, emotional body to just sort of subside. Which, and again, thanks to the Buddhist training, for me, like, psychedelics without any Buddhism is kind of just like the blind leading the blind. But once you take like a tradition like Buddhism that gives you real insight into the nature of self, and then you take that into your psychedelic journeys, it's like, it's powerful, because you're not getting lost in stories, you're not getting lost in blah blah, you're not getting distracted with ideas of grandeur and different kind of, yeah. So all of that training would really help me as an older person, when I would on the odd occasion do a journey. Yeah, having those trainings were profound.
Yeah, so I've like you, I started taking psychedelics when I was 14. And that was a long time ago. That's over 30 years now.
Yeah.
And um, I got into Buddhism and stuff like that when I was about when I was 18. So they've always been working in tandem with each other. But actually, recently, I've got to say, I have decided to have a break, quite a long break from all psychedelics, because I've had a well, so I had this last year. I had a sort of synchronicities. I had a synchronicity overload where I had a temporal lobe seizure, which is basically 30 minutes of non-stop deja vu, and unending bizarre memories. And also in the last year, I've had what I describe as a sort of cannabis-induced mini psychosis that lasted for 3 hours or something.
Wow. Geez. Yeah.
Which was, so I've been smoking cannabis every night for 5 years, up to this point when I had this experience, and I'd been fine. But then and as I said, I've been very experienced with psychedelics for 30 years, all sorts of different types, and a lot of them. But I think I kind of had a sort of a panic attack whilst being really stoned on weed, and I went into this kind of it sounded really like a schizophrenic sort of 3 hours where everything was perfect synchronicity around me, but in a very egocentric way. I mean, I've talked to some friends of mine who've had schizophrenic episodes, and one of the characteristics is this kind of very egocentric, fully egocentric experience of everything being synchronized around you, even to the point where people talking to me were God talking to me through that person. That person doesn't exist anymore. The TV was communicating with me. Everything, it was like absolutely everything was folded in synchronicity. So after that experience, I thought I'm
I need a break.
a good long time, because when you have those sort of experiences, are very common when you're tripping on something.
Yes.
But when it happens out of the blue, when you're not doing it voluntarily, it's a whole nother thing. And I don't want to go mad. I think we can kind of romanticize madness as people that are into spirituality and all of that. You think of sort of mad saints and like that. Think, oh yeah, I'd like to be like that. Would when
No.
actually, you have an experience like that, it really shook me up. So even though I am an enthusiast of all of these things, and I think even I have had to admit that I've got to take a very long break, and I still know synchronicities a lot, but I'm just a bit wary sometimes of synchronicities when they start happening, because I think, oh, here we go. Am I going into the ending synchronicity vortex here? So that, I think I just wanted to bring that up for anyone listening, that synchronicity is a real thing and it's great, and you can kind of look out for it, but there is a level at which it goes beyond being something useful, something helpful, healthy. And I have known people that have become obsessed with synchronicity, and it hasn't been a good thing for them. I've had friends that have had schizophrenia, properly gone schizophrenia for years, and it was not a desirable state, really. Although when you're having one of these episodes, it can feel amazing.
I mean, it's funny with the whole plant medicine, because like you, plant medicine has been a part of my life since I was a teenager, and admittedly, I think in my early 20s I experienced some profound healing, some real transformative profound healings. And even later on throughout my life, there have been really profound and powerful insights and learnings and guidance. But now, since becoming a mother, I think as well, whenever it's been obviously very rare that I do it, because I don't have the time or the space really to do it. But on the odd occasion I have, it's almost like it's saying to me, why did you do that? Why are you here again? What do you want? We've told you everything you need to know. Why are you here? And it's kind of like, and sometimes, I mean, I tried exploring big doses at one point when I was listening to Kalindi talk, and I just, it's like, I don't think it's what I want anymore. It's not what I need, because whatever I do when I come back, it's just like, oh my God, thank God, because right now I've got this anchor called my body, and it wakes up most mornings and I return to the same reality. And when I do larger amounts of psychedelics, it's like, luckily this hasn't died and I've managed to come back to this reality again. but sometimes it's almost like I don't want to be there. I don't know. I think I'm more uncertain about the psychedelic world now than I've ever been. And it might be delving into higher doses. I think for me, I'm not so interested in that anymore, because I just come back with a profound gratitude for having breath in my body and having this life and having this tree that is actually a solid tree, and it's going to remain solid for the duration of our conversation. And if I go away and I come back, it's still here for now. And it's
I think not everybody's cut out for it. It's a bit like surfing. If you take surfing, some people surf big waves. They do those enormous, jaws waves and things, and that's what they're into. And then there are other people that like surfing other types of waves and and that kind of thing. So, I think the dosage thing is, some people are cut out for that, but not everybody is. And I think I don't know Kalindi's stuff very much in detail, but I think there are people that say everybody should be taking large doses, and if you're not, then you're an idiot.
No. I strongly disagree. Yeah. And also there's a time and a place, isn't there? There's a time and a place, then sometimes it's really right. And doing smaller amounts and doing therapeutic amounts and doing microdosing, it seems to be really powerful and having really amazing. And I think that, for a lot of people, there's a sweet spot where it connects you, it opens you. But also I think I listen a lot to Pat McCabe. She's a Dene Navajo elder, and she's very much into what is it they say in the Lakota, that they do it off their own juice. And I'm also, in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I've come across breath work and doing, real prolonged, deep amount of breath work. And I think I prefer the cleanness. And it's like when we take psychedelics, we don't know what we're opening ourselves up to. We don't know what beings are latching onto us or coming through us. And I know that in my journeys when I was younger, there were some beings that were guides, that were working with divine love and divine will and were very supportive. But I know there were times when I was sent down tricky paths and I was distracted and I was told, it can be tricky. And so I think we need real proper guides when we're doing this. We need real people that are really grounded and rooted in these arts and these practices and can really see what's going on very clearly. Because we are, it's like the new thing, and a lot of young people are going out. And I do trust the plants. I do trust that the plants are the teachers at the end of the day, and they're the ones that guide us ultimately.
It's a whole nother big long conversation, isn't it? I just wanted to touch into that at the end, because it's been part of your life, and
I'm getting lower on battery now, so I think
let's wrap it up. So before we finish, is there you said you got a YouTube channel that look at?
I haven't put much on it for a long time. I kept my gob shut during COVID, because there were so many changing things going on, and it was all shifting so quickly. So I haven't uploaded much lately, but I've got Welsh Mountain Yeshe, like Welsh Mountain Yeti, but Yeshe is my YouTube channel. And there's an intention to get a bit more momentum and start sharing a bit more with that soon. I'm pretty, again, I live a natural life. I'm not that technologically driven. I'm not that financially driven. So I haven't got a massive following. I'm not out there trying to accumulate followers, and I'm not out there trying to become famous or earn millions of pounds to do whatever, because I don't really want to do that much other than live a nice, simple life. So you can't really find me in many places. And I've not got much of an online presence, but many people in Wales know me. And I often hold space at festivals, Green Gathering, Unearthed Festival, sometimes Buddhafield. I sometimes teach some of those as well, and plan to continue to do so. So maybe people can catch me at those places, or find me on YouTube.
Well, it's been an absolute delight, Yeshe, to hang out with you for this time and hear about
Yes.
your very, very interesting life and how deep you've gone into all of these things.
Yeah, and continue to do so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
may
Yeah.
it benefit many people.
Yeah, and you too, Ralph. Thanks for your awesome podcast. Really enjoy it and appreciate listening to them. Yeah, great stuff. Cool.
Right, lots of love.
See you
Bye.
later in the summer. Take
Yeah.
care. Bye-bye.
I made all the music that I use in my podcasts. If you'd like to hear more of my music, please visit SoundCloud and check out my profile, Ralph Cree.